If you just heard that sound and felt a wave of sadness instead of excitement, you understand what happened to Nickelodeon. That orange splat used to represent creativity, rebellion, and the belief that kids deserved better entertainment than adults thought they could handle. Now it represents corporate focus groups, formulaic programming, and the slow death of everything that made childhood television magical. From 2004 to today, Nickelodeon hasn't just declined. It has systematically destroyed everything that made it special. The network that once gave us Rugrats, Hey Arnold, The Adventures of Pete and Pete, and all that, now produces an endless stream of identical sitcoms, mindless cartoons, and content so aggressively mediocre that it makes you wonder if the people running the network have ever actually met a child. But here's what most people don't realize. Nickelodeon's downfall wasn't caused by changing technology, shifting audience preferences, or increased competition from other networks. Disney Channel got better during the same period. Cartoon Network found new ways to innovate. Even PBS Kids managed to evolve while maintaining their creative integrity. So what exactly went wrong at Nickelodeon? How did the network that once ruled childhood entertainment become a cautionary tale about corporate greed destroying artistic vision? Why did the channel that taught an entire generation to embrace their weirdness become a soulless content factory that treats kids like mindless consumers rather than intelligent human beings? The answer isn't what you think. Because what killed Nickelodeon wasn't just about television at all. It was about three catastrophic business decisions that nobody saw coming. And they would transform not just how the network operated, but how an entire generation of kids would grow up without the creative, rebellious, kid-first programming that had defined childhood for decades. But before we understand what went wrong, we need to understand just how revolutionary and irreplaceable Nickelodeon was during its golden age. To understand the downfall of Nickelodeon, we need to go back to 1991, when the network wasn't just making television shows. It was creating a cultural revolution that told kids their thoughts, feelings, and perspectives mattered more than adult approval or corporate profits. Nickelodeon in the 90s was unlike anything that had ever existed in children's television. The shows were weird, experimental, and unapologetically strange. The Adventures of Pete and Pete was a surreal meditation on suburban childhood that treated kids' emotions with the seriousness of art house cinema. Rugrats explored the world from a baby's perspective with psychological depth that most adult dramas couldn't match. Hey Arnold tackled urban decay, family dysfunction, and social issues that other networks wouldn't dare address in children's programming. These weren't just TV shows, they were validation for an entire generation of kids who felt misunderstood, overlooked, and talked down to by the adult world. I remember watching The Adventures of Pete and Pete as a kid and feeling like someone finally understood what it was actually like to be young. The intensity of small moments, the way adults seemed to live in a completely different reality, the feeling that there was magic hiding just beneath the surface of ordinary life. Nickelodeon didn't just entertain kids, it respected them. The network assumed that children were intelligent, emotionally complex, and capable of handling sophisticated storytelling. It celebrated weirdness, encouraged creativity, and gave kids permission to be exactly who they were rather than who adults wanted them to be. But then something changed, and that change began with Nickelodeon's first catastrophic decision, prioritizing ratings over creativity. The turning point came in 2004 when SpongeBob SquarePants became a massive hit, and Nickelodeon's executives made a decision that would destroy the network's creative soul. They decided that instead of supporting diverse, experimental programming, they would focus on creating more shows that could replicate SpongeBob's success. Now, SpongeBob itself wasn't the problem. It was a genuinely creative, well-made show that deserved its success. The problem was how Nickelodeon's corporate leadership interpreted that success. Instead of seeing SpongeBob as proof that kids responded to original creative content, executives saw it as a formula to be replicated. They began demanding that all new shows have similar elements: bright colors, simple humor, characters that could be easily merchandised, and storylines that wouldn't challenge or confuse young audiences. This marked the beginning of what I call the Great Dumbing Down, a systematic effort to make Nickelodeon programming as safe, predictable, and commercially viable as possible. Shows that had been in development with complex characters, experimental animation, or challenging themes were canceled or retooled to fit the new SpongeBob-inspired formula. Writers and creators who had built their careers on pushing boundaries and respecting kids' intelligence were told to simplify their ideas or find work elsewhere. I remember watching this transformation happen in real time. Shows like My Life as a Teenage Robot and Danny Phantom, which had genuine creativity and emotional depth, were canceled or moved to terrible time slots, while new shows that followed the bright and simple formula were given prime placement and massive promotional budgets. But Nickelodeon's second catastrophic decision was even more destructive. They decided to abandon animation in favor of a cheap live-action sitcoms. In 2007, Nickelodeon executives made a decision that revealed just how little they understood about what made their network special. They decided that animation was too expensive and that live-action sitcoms would be cheaper to produce and easier to market to advertisers. This led to an explosion of identical teen sitcoms: iCarly, Victorious, Big Time Rush, The Thundermans, that all followed the exact same formula. Attractive teenagers dealing with minor problems in colorful sets while delivering jokes written by adults who clearly had no idea how actual teenagers talked or behaved. These shows weren't just bad, they were insulting. They treated kids like they were too stupid to notice that every show was essentially the same program with different character names and slightly different settings. And here's what made this shift so devastating. It eliminated the very thing that had made Nickelodeon special: the willingness to take creative risks and trust kids to appreciate sophisticated storytelling. Live-action sitcoms were safe, predictable, and focus group tested to death. There was no room for the weird, experimental, emotionally honest programming that had defined Nickelodeon's golden age. But the most heartbreaking part of this transition was watching Nickelodeon actively reject the creators and shows that had built their reputation in the first place. When Avatar: The Last Airbender became a massive critical and commercial success, proving that kids still wanted sophisticated, serialized storytelling with complex characters and meaningful themes, Nickelodeon's response was telling. They canceled the sequel series The Legend of Korra and moved it to online-only distribution because it didn't fit their new live-action sitcom strategy. This was Nickelodeon literally rejecting their own success because it didn't match the corporate formula they had decided to follow. But Nickelodeon's third and most catastrophic decision was the one that completed their transformation from a creative powerhouse into a soulless content factory. They decided to treat kids like consumers rather than human beings. The final nail in Nickelodeon's coffin came when the network fully embraced what media critics call the merchandising mindset. The idea that television shows should exist primarily to sell products rather than to entertain, educate, or inspire their audiences. This shift was most obvious in how Nickelodeon began developing new shows. Instead of starting with creative concepts or compelling characters, they began starting with marketing research and focus group data about what products kids wanted to buy. Shows were designed around toy lines, clothing brands, and licensing opportunities rather than around storytelling or character development. The question wasn't, what kind of story do we want to tell? But, what kind of merchandise can we sell? This approach produced shows that felt hollow and artificial because they were hollow and artificial. They were advertisements disguised as entertainment, created by committees of marketers rather than by artists who cared about connecting with kids. And here's what made this shift so tragic. It represented the complete abandonment of everything Nickelodeon had once stood for. The network that had once celebrated kids' intelligence, creativity, and individuality was now treating them like walking wallets whose only value was their ability to convince their parents to buy products. The network that had once given kids permission to be weird, different, and authentically themselves was now producing content designed to make them want to be like everyone else so they would buy the same products as everyone else. But perhaps the most damaging aspect of Nickelodeon's downfall was how it affected an entire generation of kids who grew up without the creative, rebellious, kid-first programming that had shaped their older siblings and parents. Kids who came of age during Nickelodeon's decline missed out on the experience of seeing themselves reflected in sophisticated, emotionally honest entertainment. They missed out on shows that celebrated their intelligence and respected their capacity for complex emotions. Instead, they got content that assumed they were shallow, materialistic, and incapable of appreciating anything more complex than bright colors and simple jokes. And here's what makes Nickelodeon's downfall so frustrating. It was completely unnecessary. Other networks proved that it was possible to evolve and adapt to changing times while maintaining creative integrity. Disney Channel found ways to produce both commercial hits and critically acclaimed programming. Cartoon Network continued to take creative risks and support experimental shows. Even streaming services like Netflix began producing the kind of sophisticated children's programming that Nickelodeon had abandoned. Nickelodeon had every advantage: brand recognition, talented creators, a loyal audience, and decades of experience making great television for kids. But they threw it all away in pursuit of short-term profits and corporate efficiency. The most tragic part of Nickelodeon's downfall is that it didn't have to happen. The network could have honored its creative legacy while still adapting to modern realities. They could have supported both commercial hits and experimental programming. They could have treated kids as intelligent consumers of media rather than mindless buyers of products. But instead, they chose the path of least resistance: formulaic programming, focus group-tested content, and the systematic elimination of everything that had made them special in the first place. Looking back now, Nickelodeon's downfall represents more than just the decline of one television network. It represents the victory of corporate thinking over creative vision, of market research over artistic integrity, of treating kids like consumers rather than human beings deserving of respect and sophisticated entertainment. The kids who grew up during Nickelodeon's golden age became adults who valued creativity, embraced their weirdness, and understood that being different was something to celebrate rather than hide. We learned that our thoughts and feelings mattered, that adults didn't always know best, and that the best entertainment was the kind that challenged us rather than talked down to us. But the kids who grew up during Nickelodeon's decline missed out on these lessons. They got content that told them to conform, to consume, and to accept mediocrity as entertainment. And that's the real tragedy of Nickelodeon's downfall. It's not just about the loss of good television shows. It's about the loss of a cultural institution that once told kids they were smart, creative, and worthy of respect. Sure, there are still good shows for kids being made, just not on Nickelodeon. The creative energy that once defined the network has moved to other platforms, other networks, and other creators who still believe that kids deserve better than focus-grouped mediocrity. But for those of us who remember what Nickelodeon used to be, the orange splat will always represent what we lost. A network that believed kids were smart enough to handle sophisticated storytelling, weird enough to appreciate experimental programming, and important enough to deserve entertainment that respected their intelligence and celebrated their individuality. The downfall of Nickelodeon is the story of what happens when corporate executives stop caring about their audience and start caring only about their profit margins. It's a cautionary tale about the importance of protecting creative vision from market research, and a reminder that the best entertainment for kids, like the best entertainment for anyone, comes from artists who respect their audience rather than executives who see them as walking wallets. And honestly, in a world where kids are constantly being sold to, talked down to, and treated like consumers rather than human beings, maybe we need to remember what Nickelodeon used to represent: the radical idea that kids deserve entertainment that challenges them, respects them, and celebrates the beautiful weirdness of being young. If this brought back memories of what Nickelodeon used to mean to you, please subscribe to the channel and check out the videos on your screen. There's so much more nostalgic media history to explore together.